We will finish this war. That is Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said earlier this morning from the podium at the Pentagon, where he was laying out all the reasons why we are killing everybody, taking names on our way to victory. He promised that he would tell all the surviving family members of our troops who have died in combat that this is for you and we will not stop. And they told me, he said, don't stop until you finish the job. And I said, we won't. We will finish this. I'm not sure he should have said that. In fact, I am sure he should definitely not have said that, because whatever he's thinking, it ain't happening on the ground. And that's where we live here on this show. We talk about what's true, not just what people say. And we're going to take a look at what's really going on and some of the disjointed comments that are coming from other people and how there is no relation to reality. And there's probably nobody better to talk about that I can think of than Brother Scott Horton, back on the show. I hadn't had you on in a while. Scott is the founder of the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom, which features long-form courses from Scott and his colleagues. He is also the author of several books, the latest of which is Provoked. Highly recommend that one because it is just absolutely chock full of information and dead true. And he also hosts the Scott Horton Show, which you can find on YouTube. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, let's just get right into it here, because Hegseth says, you know what? We know what's more important. I mean, our whole thing in this channel here is that we are unintimidated, uncompromised to bring the truth, right? That's where we live. Well, it turns out, according to Hegseth, he is too. He's all about the truth.
Why are we helping Israel prosecute this war if they're going to pursue their own objectives?
We hold the cards. We have objectives. Those objectives are clear. We have allies pursuing objectives as well. And the truth speaks for itself. I mean, President Trump was very clear about that. Iran has weaponized energy for decades. Israel clearly sent a warning, and POTUS has made it clear, very clear. Iran knows when you hit Karg Island and you hit military capabilities on Karg Island, which is the only thing we hit, we can hold anything at issue, anything. The United States military controls the fate of that country.
Yeah, but do we control? I mean, well, let's just start off with his truth that everybody knows, that Iran has been weaponizing energy for decades. What say you, Scott?
Well, I was going to ask you what you thought he meant by that, sir. I honestly don't know. I mean, obviously, America's had sanctions against them, preventing them from selling their oil. So you think about parallel accusations like Dick Cheney ranting against Vladimir Putin, charging Ukraine the market price for gas instead of giving them the special discount previously or something. You could see how they're, this does affect Ukraine's budget, this kind of thing, right? There's a little bit of gangsterism going on there for sure. But what did Iran do as far as extorting people with their hydrocarbons? I don't know exactly what he's referring to there, but I think it goes to the overall kind of narrative that, but Mr. Davis, Colonel Davis, they call us the great Satan and they chant death to America. And so they are completely and totally incorrigible. And there's just nothing that we can do, when it's so easy to just put the exact same facts in another context. Like, for example, we're number one. Donald Trump, the emperor of the planet Earth, has nothing to fear from any Ayatollah. And so he could actually just go over there and make a deal, right? Send his people over there. He certainly could have. It's obviously much more difficult now, but I ain't afraid of no Ayatollah in the kind of, Nixon can go to China. Only Nixon can go to China. Only Reagan can deal with Gorbachev and sign these nuclear treaties and this kind of thing. Well, only Trump could make peace with the Ayatollah. And there's no reason he has to have this kind of policy at all. Same thing. You saw him in his first term, the way he was willing to meet with Kim Jong-un. Nobody thought, the stupid liberal TV media tried to attack him like this, but no decent person thought that, he's selling us out to North Korea or anything like that. It's in America's interest to neutralize the tension between these two nuclear powers, ours and theirs. So that, obviously ought to be the basis of the entire Trumpian foreign policy of this term. And he's thrown it all away for Zionism. It's really a shame.
It really is. And getting back to his truth issue here about how the Iranians were weaponizing hydrocarbons. I mean, let's just jump to back to the first term here. This is from January 15th, 2019. Trump administration still might let Iran export oil. And this was going on. The State Department's envoy to Iran is declining to say whether Washington will force oil buyers to cut off purchases from Iranian crude later this year. And we ended up doing that. We took it down to something close to zero. And basically, it was just a trickle after that. So one might wonder, if you're actually considering reality, who was actually putting pressure on whom and weaponizing energy. Don't think it was Iran. But see, that's what he's counting on, people not looking. He's counting on people not doing any research and just taking him at his word and saying, yeah, well, you know what? I mean, if they were doing that, it was right for us to go into a war. What do you think about this twisting of facts, or just making them up out of whole cloth to justify this war of choice?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes even just decent people start rationalizing and coming up with their own explanations of what must be the brilliant 4D chess move behind it all, that kind of thing. But they're just bluffing. I mean, this is about greater Israel. This is about them not wanting to have another medium rank power in the region to balance against theirs. And so it's a matter of destroying them one by one as much as they can, especially breaking Tehran's alliance with Hezbollah. That was the Iraq war, idiotically, was supposed to achieve that. That didn't work. Support for the caliphate did achieve that, but in the Obama term, it blew up into the caliphate in a way, the Islamic State thing. That was too much. They had to reverse that again. But now they succeeded in helping al-Qaeda sack Damascus as of, the end of 2024. And what people need to understand about that, how could America support al-Qaeda there? Why is Trump squirting perfume on this guy and flirting with him in the Oval Office? Like, what is behind this whole thing? It's because al-Qaeda hates Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is Israel's enemy. That's their problem. It's the Shiite militia in southern Lebanon. So you have America, this is one of those cases where it couldn't be more obvious, the stark difference between Israel's interests and America's, and America takes Israel's side against itself. Basically, our government takes Israel's side against our country and would support a bin Ladenite regime as long as it's against a Shiite one. So, and a huge part of the problem here, Danny, with all of this is that Trump really doesn't know that much about it. So like when he had General Flynn telling him that, listen, sir, we sure don't like Hezbollah, but we really don't like al-Qaeda. So we should stop backing al-Qaeda in Syria. Trump said, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? And Mike Flynn, everybody knows, absolutely hates the Ayatollah in Iran. But his position was, that doesn't mean I want to back Osama's guys in Syria, for God's sake. Let's just hit Tehran then. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. But when he spoke reason to Trump, Trump said, that sounds great. But if he doesn't have somebody who's good on this stuff walking him through it, he's not watching your show. And, Charlie Kirk apparently was in constant contact with him, showing him anti-war type fare, and was a real restraining influence on him, and he's gone. And I don't know what's all behind that. I tend to be a minimalist about those kinds of things, but at least, as soon as Tulsi Gabbard ever contradicted him, he said, listen, I don't want to hear from you, lady, if you don't want to say what I want you to say. And so and when you hear Trump himself regurgitate some of the propaganda where you could tell he's not lying, he just doesn't know anything, but he's repeating just what he knows from Fox News. He's not really, and if he has his staff really briefing him on this stuff, they're not emphasizing, well, here's the real truth, sir, or anything, you know what I mean? So it's basically, he's going off of what Lindsey Graham and Mark Levin are telling him, what Netanyahu's telling him.
Ouch.
Great example, probably the most crucial example of all, right? Is if you hit them, they will fall. Everyone hates them. Their regime is completely fragile and ready to go because of the mean old Ayatollah. You kill him and everything will fall apart. And
cards, man, just tumble over.
Yeah. And so like in January, remember they had the protests, and apparently like 3,000 people were killed, maybe 4 or something. And that includes the cops and armed groups that were fighting them in the streets and all of this. But the propaganda was that 30 to even 50 or 80,000 people were massacred in the street. Now, obviously the first part of that was to draw outrage and get people to support the war, that, oh my goodness, these people are terrible. It's like the Anfal campaign in the 1980s or whatever, Saddam Hussein versus the Kurds, some horrible thing like that to amp people up. But here's the thing about that is if you believe that, then there's a whole other kind of implication built into that, which is that the regime had to kill 50,000 protesters in the streets to keep them from overthrowing the regime. And they only then, with the people, the mass of people, must have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people trying to overthrow the government. And after they killed like 30 or 50,000 of them, the rest of them finally went home. When in fact, no, it was much smaller than that. There's no reason to think. And in fact, what it was really armed groups on the ground, not just protesters, but just like we saw like in Kazakhstan in January of 2020. Oh, well, there's a big protest movement over the price of fuel goes up or something. And then all of a sudden there's armed teams, guys sacking police stations and airports and, seizing control of things, or trying to. It's the same kind of organized effort here. But it helped to sow this illusion, almost certainly in Trump's mind, that, yeah, apparently the whole city of Tehran would have overthrown this guy if, they had not resorted to such absolute mass violence that in your imagination is supposed to replicate like the Battle of the Somme in World War I or something.
And what does that tell you about what's going on the internal side of the Trump inner circle I'm talking about, not just the administration, but on his inner circle, when it has subsequently been leaked that there was an NIC intelligence estimate that basically said everything that has happened would happen. So somebody told him ahead of time that would be the case. And one wonders if that was Joe Kent. I don't have any knowledge about whether that's related to his resignation later on, but somebody was telling Trump that what did happen would, as opposed to what you're describing there. So what does that tell you about the inner fights inside his inner circle?
Yeah, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in the thing. I think a lot of us do, right? Who's allowed by the chief of staff to have access to the president and tell him what? And listen, there are a lot of people who really like Trump and really don't want to change their opinion about that and all that. That's fine. I'm not asking anybody to move anywhere on this, but there's a lot of kind of the idea that, what's the poor guy going to do when the Israelis drag him into war or whatever? And the reality is he's the boss. And if he had a standing order to his chief of staff that said, listen, when you have medium rank people who are really disgruntled about the way of the policy here, let them come talk to me. I want to hear from them. You know what I mean? I want to, whatever, get me a team of rivals in here to contradict each other, check and balance in front of the boss. And I think he does not encourage that at all, right? Like all indications are is he wants to be told what he already thinks. And he wants to be told, yeah, that's right, boss. That's what we say too and whatever. And, I didn't see the whole thing with Gabbard yesterday. I'm sorry, I've been very busy, but I did see a clip on another show I was on. They played a clip for me and where Gabbard is saying that essentially she stands by the truth. No, they weren't making nuclear weapons. She didn't think that they were preparing an attack against us. But then the Democrat on the committee is trying to force her to use the phrase, it was not imminent, so that she's saying that Trump is a liar. And she's saying, well, look, but that's not my job, right? My job is to tell him all these facts. The imminent part of it is got to be his opinion. I don't get to tell him whether it's really imminent or not. Now, that's a little bit weasel words kind of language there, but in a sense, that's also very true, right? He didn't ask her whether she thinks this is a good enough reason to start a war. There's no reason in the world to think that he would ask her that. And it's probably true that she told him, no, sir, I don't think that they're making nukes. But then again, hey, that's a matter of opinion. The Israelis' matter of opinion this whole time has been for them to have a nuclear program at all is essentially a nascent nuclear weapons program. Same difference to them. And so I'm sorry to repeat myself for people watching me on different interviews, but if you go back to 2002, the National Intelligence Estimate said Saddam would never use chemical weapons against the United States unless maybe we invaded the country. He might use them to protect the capital city, something like that. But give them to Al-Qaeda to attack the United States? No. That was the official position of the intelligence community, which presumably Condoleezza Rice at least summarized it for the boss or something, right? And then what did George W. Bush say? He said, yeah, well, I disagree with that. I actually think that they might give it to Al-Qaeda, and that's a risk I'm not willing to take. He's not bound by their opinion of what his opinion about these facts is supposed to be. So now that also is a great way to diffuse responsibility, right? It's not Tulsi's fault when she could be up there railing and saying, actually, the president's full of it. None of his justifications are true, and I quit too. And she's not doing that. So don't get me wrong. I'm not apologizing for that, but I'm just saying in the context of the thing, that's the way he gets to hide behind it. And why, right, is because ever since Harry Truman, they've completely thrown out Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, where only the Congress can declare war, not authorize the president to start a war, not this completely false reading of the War Powers Resolution of 1973 that says that somehow the president can start a war for free for 60 days, which is not what it says. It says he can defend the country for 60 days. And even when we've been attacked, he still has to come to Congress for authorization within that 60 days to continue on, is what it actually says. And people always, twist that around, and then they make it where it is up to the president, essentially his whim. As he said, Danny, he goes, maybe we just do this out of habit. We don't even need the oil. Maybe we do it just for Israel.
Yeah. And I guess I will quibble just a wee bit on part of the justification part, because whether something is a threat or an imminent threat is the operative thing, because the claim, and President Trump and Hegseth and Rubio and all these people are going out saying that there was an imminent threat. We had to do this or we would be struck. Witkoff, biggest purveyor of this. They were 2 weeks from a nuclear bomb. Lindsey Graham, 2 weeks from a nuclear bomb. And yet in that section with Tulsa, or at least I don't know if it's the same one you were talking about, but they said, was it obliterated in 2025? Yes. Did they have any effort to rebuild it? No. So there were no facilities, whatever, that they could have a bomb. That is correct. Then was there imminent threat? Because by definition, it's impossible. It's a physical impossibility. And yet then she said, well, that's his interpretation. There's no interpretation. If there's no capacity, you can't manufacture one. But, and this gets back to something you said a second ago, I think maybe somebody else did have an interest, whether there was a nuclear program or not, and you're just using that as justification. So that's where I would quibble just a wee bit.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, of course I agree with you, except that the president can just move the goalpost wherever he wants and say, look, I just think a theocratic regime that supports Hezbollah and has rockets and a nuclear program is bad.
See, I think that he is 100% agree. It is absolutely the president's decision. He can twist it around. He can reinterpret whatever, but the director of national intelligence is obligated to say, here is my assessment. And there's no imminent threat because they don't have it. And then you can say, well, I think they might get it. Fine. That's your prerogative. You have the authority and the responsibility. But to claim that wasn't talked to him, or you didn't tell him that's an issue. But then I want to get back to what you said a second ago, because you keep saying this a couple of times now, that it's this is not our need. We didn't need this war, but it was an Israeli decision, which was, by the way, cited by Joe Kent as part of his resignation. He said that's exactly what happened, that the Israeli side pushed him into it, that the American media was complicit, pushed him in that direction. And at this morning's press conference with Pete Hegseth, he was asked about that question about whether it was the Israelis' objectives or ours, and watch how he deflects that. And then instead of just leaving it there, he's going to go ahead and take an opportunity to trash our European allies at the same time.
The world, the Middle East, our ungrateful allies in Europe, even segments of our own press should be saying one thing to President Trump. Thank you. Thank you for the courage to stop this terror state from holding the world hostage with missiles while building or attempting to build a nuclear bomb. Thank you for doing the work of the free world.
Thank you. This harkens back to the Volodymyr Zelensky visiting into the White House in February of last year, where J.D. Vance jumped all over and says, you didn't even say thank you to President Trump in here. And now here's Hegseth saying all of our European allies, y'all should all be saying thank you for doing all this stuff. Are you thankful, Scott?
No, I mean, the hubris here reminds me more than anything of the W. Bush years. Or, oh boy, there's a book by Jacob Hilburn about the neoconservatives called "They Knew They Were Right," but it wasn't just the neocons, which is a tiny little sect of kooks, but also everyone under their influence, and that echo chamber and the consensus that they built at that time. Remember, they didn't just get us into that war. They kept us in that war the whole time. And anytime anybody said, boy, this isn't going well, they said, you want to cut and run. You're sacrificing the guys who already died in vain if you stop now. And just the level of kind of Bill O'Reilly-ish, just absolute force hockey that was shoved down people's throats to force the consensus, to keep them in this thing. And based on those kind of certainties, we know what we're doing here, and how dare you even doubt us? In fact, as long as I'm renting this, it's important to me. I don't know. The spell at least in the major media and the overall consensus, that W. Bush and his men were the most competent administrators in the history of war parties, launching wars and doing things, was not broken until August of 2005. Safely after the re-election, it was when Hurricane Katrina drowned New Orleans, and the National Guard was nowhere to be seen because they were in Iraq, and same for the neighboring states too. And then it just went on day after day after day, and eventually Anderson Cooper was crying live on TV. More than 1,000 people died, and that there are no helicopters. Nobody's coming. George W. Bush apparently did not say to whoever, get in there and do something. Just nothing's happening. And people just, their spirit just finally broke that actually this guy is an idiot. None of this makes sense at all. And this war never made any sense and all that. But it was like you weren't even allowed to think that or say that. Otherwise, this is where it was coined. Charles Krauthammer, the neoconservative, coined the phrase. You have Bush derangement syndrome. You just hate Bush. Not that anyone could have any reason to hate Bush. Just you start out with hating him and then you come up with reasons to. That was the dominant narrative until finally Hurricane Katrina began to break it. And then, of course, it only benefited the Democrats. Not that that helped us at all. But this is the same kind of spirit with which, a shrinking core of Trumpian dead enders are, basing their kind of arguments on, is just, even though after a few weeks of this, it looks nothing like it was supposed to. Don't worry, trust the plan, double down, short-term pain for long-term gain. I heard him say that 17 times on Fox News. So that's the deal. And they must have secret information that we don't know about that justifies why they're doing this. And they burned our flag back in 79. And
it's funny, Scott. I got something on that. Gary, we're going to go a little out of order here because it's perfectly aligned with what you just said. That same spirit is very much alive and well today. Last night on Laura Ingraham, she had Stephen Miller on there, and she was asking him ahead just right before this clip starts. She says, hey, this whole thing about the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, it's been 20 days now. Why have we not broken through? Why is this taking so long? Watch his answer.
Why is this taking so long?
Well, I would look at it the exact opposite, which is how has this happened so fast? So you're talking about what would normally be considered months or even years to achieve these military objectives, instead have been achieved in a matter of days, because under the leadership of President Trump, and then, of course, with Secretary Hegseth of the Department of War, we are not fighting a politically correct battle. The hands of our warriors are not tied in getting up and going after the objective, and going after the objective ruthlessly, because this is war, and in a war, you have to fight totally. And so we have seen the leadership of this regime has been completely decapitated and obliterated.
Okay, so I almost, if we had time, I would have pulled up Mike Johnson from about a week ago, emphatically saying this was not a war. Now here's Stephen Miller emphatically saying it is a war. So make some sense out of that. But he starts off by saying it would normally have taken months or years to accomplish all that we have so far. Wait a minute. She just said the strait is still closed, so you haven't done anything. You've killed a number of people, but the regime is very much still in power. They've replaced the leader. They've moved on. You've assassinated some others. So far, you haven't done anything except blow up a lot of antiquated planes and antiquated boats, but they still have the full power over the Strait of Hormuz. What do you make of that?
Well, you're right. This was very apropos of the previous segment there. He reminds me of a cross between Ari Fleischer and Baghdad Bob there. Same thing anyway, right?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, it's a catastrophe. I mean, they made the biggest deal about the strait, and then the Iranians reached out and blew up a couple of oil tankers up near Iraq and Kuwait to underline the point that straight nothing. The entire Gulf is called the Persian Gulf because it's their entire coastline, and they will pwn it, and there's nothing that we can do about it. So, who cares about this strait? It could be any mile up there, any boat that they want to hold hostage. And Danny, I'm sure that if people go back through the archives, I know for my part, and I'm sure on your show, me interviewing you and vice versa about this, why not to do this? I mean, I've been talking about this. I've known about this since I really started my main show on a daily basis in January of 2007, that the chiefs told W. Bush, we'll do the surge in Iraq, okay? But we don't want to go to Iran. And the reason why was because we won't have escalation dominance. Yes, we can whoop them eventually. Everybody knows that. However, it will be only at severe cost. And at that time, we had 50,000 guys in Afghanistan, 150,000 probably in Iraq, but plus still Army and Air Force bases in Kuwait, Air Force in Qatar, Navy in Bahrain, and plus whatever Army and Air Force in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and I didn't know Oman, but I guess I could have guessed. And then plus, as I would always put it, trillions or gazillions of dollars worth of economic targets all up and down the southwestern side of that Persian Gulf, all of which is at risk. And everybody knows that, yeah, we have really great interceptors, but it's simply a matter of volume. And so we'll be able to shoot down a lot of their stuff, but they will be able to hit our bases if we push them that far. That's the risk. For Trump to say, oh, I had no idea that they could do that, means either he's lying or people were really shining him on that, like, well, sir, you said you didn't want to know what they might be able to do, so I'm not telling you. You know, it's hard to imagine that anyone could look at that map and think, and because, right, like, this is just common knowledge, just total, like, amateur knowledge. Iran has lots and lots and lots of medium range missiles, right? Everyone knows that. Exactly how many, exactly how well deployed, exactly how well targetable, et cetera, I don't know. But can they just pour missiles onto our base in Kuwait until some get through? Yes. And then, so let me actually interview you for a sec here, sir, and ask you, can you give us a good battle damage assessment? I know there's been a few reports in the New York Times, but I hate the New York Times. But there's been a lot of others too, of like, apparently they've hit virtually all of America's military bases, from Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan all the way to Oman and the gates of the Gulf, correct?
Yeah, a total of 17 bases and sites, according to published reports, have been struck to one level or another. Some have just been utterly devastated. I don't know that it's been physically wiped off the map per se, but you don't have to. It's been degraded enough that it has caused us to have to withdraw many of our troops away from there to get them out of the region, as well as our ships to move them out of the range of some of the longer range missiles that the Iranians have. So they've been very effective at limiting our power. And you may have seen, we lost an F-35 today, first one that was venturing over Iranian airspace. So I guess that's not exactly as shut down as we claimed. And we've also lost a number of MQ-9 Reapers, MQ-9 drones. So this is still not the slam dunk that Pete Hegseth is trying to tell us it is.
Yeah. And listen, I'm not the world's greatest expert on this technology. I know people like to argue in the comments section about it and whatever, but the critical reporting has been for 15, 20 years and more now that the F-35 is a turkey. There were some problems with the F-22. They seem to have resolved them, and everybody swears it's a great airframe, et cetera, et cetera. What do I know? Fine. But the F-35 has been a piece of junk the whole time. And it just is, as everybody always puts it, is trying to be the ultimate supercar that can do anything, and then it can't do anything very well. And so they claim that it's stealthy, but it's really not stealthy. And it's not fast, and it can't climb, and it can't turn, and you can't fly it in the rain, and you have to keep the fuel in a very special, different fuel tank because you can't keep it out in the sun. And just the helmet doesn't work, and the radar doesn't work, and the this and that and whatever. And as critics have pointed out, old-fashioned long-wave radar, and especially with modern microchips running it, can shoot these things down, can get a lock on them. There is no real stealth. It's essentially public relations. And now look at this. They shot this down with what? A SM. The best they got would be a SM-400 from the Russians, right? Do we even know that that was what it was?
We don't have any knowledge yet. We don't know exactly. All that CENTCOM has said is that it was shot down over Iranian airspace and that it landed at some friendly location, which they have not yet talked about.
I can't tell you, man. I know you too, but I cannot tell you how many times I heard, listen, Horton, the F-35 doesn't have to be fast. It doesn't have to be able to climb or fight, because the F-35 will never have to fight because it's so good. It can kill everyone from so far away that no one can ever come anywhere near. I swear it's no less than 100 times I've been told that over the years. And now here you go. Well, wrong.
And speaking of wrong, really nice segue here. Back to Hegseth's comment that he was trashing some of our allies. Apparently, that's an intentional plan here I don't know if we're trying to shame our European allies into doing something for us, or I don't know. Maybe we've just lost our mind, but that's continuing on. It wasn't just President Trump who trashed them in some of his Truth Socials. He's trying to get them to come and send their ships to get the Strait of Hormuz. Apparently not realizing that's not how you open the strait, is just running ships down the lane. I could show you something else on that in a second, but here is Jack Keane trying to reinforce what President Trump is saying, and apparently Secretary Hegseth.
These social democracy countries that have been running the European countries for so many years now, they focused on entitlement programs. They had open borders like we had for a number of years, and they've had them for actually longer than that. They have serious issues as a result of it. They absolutely decapitated their defense budgets to pay for these entitlement programs over a course of decades. And then we show up with Russia. What did Russia look at? He sees vulnerabilities. He sees American weak leadership. He doesn't see the Europeans standing up here, and he takes advantage of the situation and invades Ukraine. The reality is the Europeans have started to get the message. Donald Trump, number one, Putin, number two. And they are beginning to rebuild these defenses. It will take some time to do it. Is it frustrating that the attitude when Trump asks for help and they stiff him here? You betcha it is.
I mean, let's just start with that last part first. I'm going to hit a couple things in there, but the audacity and the arrogance that says, hey, I started a war of choice here that I didn't need to start, that you guys asked me not to start, by the way. We'll throw that in there. But then when we did anyway, you're not sending your ships over here to be sunk and sent to the bottom of the Persian Gulf, even though we asked you to. What's going on? That's basically what he's saying there. And when he's starting off with that, with first just deriding and insulting them all about how their version of democracy and social welfare and whatever they want to do over there, however they run their country, he's like trashing all of that and then saying, get over here and die for us because we ask you to. So, you bet I'm mad. What do you say?
It's so strange. I'm not sure I really understand why they're doing that. They're not sailing their ships through there. They already said because they could take them out. And so it doesn't seem to me like they reasonably expect for any other country to come and open the strait for the American Navy. And then Trump, even in a tweet a few days ago, his Truth Social account, even said that, had on the list of countries he was asking to come and help was China. All the people trying to rationalize this war go, well, this isn't even really about Iran and Israel and greater Zionism and whatever. No. This is all about America's strategery against the Chinese. That's how W. Bush called it. But no, Trump is going, China, help. But what are they supposed to do? What is he even talking about? Is this something that they had a meeting about where Rubio said, yeah, Mr. President, what we need to do is guilt and shame the other countries in the world into coming and bailing us out? And it just looks like a massive portrayal of weakness. I mean, obviously, I don't think that there is much they can do about it other than somehow sue for peace and try to figure out a way to negotiate an end to this conflict. I prefer just coming right home, but trying to find a way to resolve it would be one thing. But put together a coalition with China and England and whoever to come in. I mean, the whole thing is completely crazy. And so I quite honestly don't even know if it's just public relations. I still don't understand to what end. And just like with Jack Keane, the author of two massive failed escalations, the so-called surges in Iraq and Afghanistan, David Petraeus' daddy there, who got everything wrong his entire, at least post-career. I don't know what a failure he was actually in uniform, but ever since he was on TV and in the think tanks telling people what to do, he's been nothing but an absolute catastrophe and probably a hell of an arms salesman as well. But what he expects to do by saying, yeah, you're all a bunch of nanny state, limousine, liberal weaklings, turn over your Navy to us to use. I don't even know. I mean, honestly, the guy's intellectually lazy. I don't know if that even represents a real agenda of any kind, or he was just trying to think of something to say on TV,
Well, he certainly did. And I couldn't figure it out. That's why I was hoping you to be able to explain it to me, because I couldn't see any rhyme or reason. Oftentimes I disagree strongly with stuff that Jack Keane says, but at least I understand what he's trying to do here. though I just don't get it. And unless that was just kind of a meltdown moment, he was supposed to try and shame him into coming, but then I don't know, revealed his secret hatred for the way the Europeans run their show. I don't know. But what I do know is, going back to Secretary Hegseth, he was asked again about, I think right before this question starts here, he was asked about, this looks like you're doing a lot of stuff for Israel. But he says, no. This isn't about Israel. This is about America first.
This is not those wars. President Trump knows better. Epic Fury is different. It's laser focused. It's decisive. Our objectives, given directly from our America First president, remain exactly what they were on day one. Destroy missiles, launchers, and Iran's defense industrial base so they cannot rebuild. Destroy their navy, and Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Our objectives.
Yeah, okay, fine. Those are your objectives. Other than destroying the visible Navy right now. And by the way, let's just be clear on this. There has been CENTCOM has released a ton of videos of the destruction of a bunch of their ships that were at sea. In fact, we had a video of their commander who sit there and just diagrammed one ship after another. Some of these big service combatants, like, World War II kind of thing. The big ships, knocked them all out. They're just sitting at harbor. Most of them are just sitting on the pier. Obviously, they knew they were going to get. There's no way they could protect them. It's not like they were out doing naval missions. They were just sitting there, and we blew them up, or we sank that one coming back unarmed from an experiment with the Indians, I believe it was. And so that's what we say there. Well, and then we've blown up the visible Air Force, and there's been some, not a whole lot, of pictures of us blowing up stuff. Gary was showing one a minute ago. You had some of these big, tanker aircraft or transport aircrafts, again, just sitting out on the tarmac. There's not much they could do about them. That's not their power, though. Their power, instead of having an Air Force, which they knew they couldn't compete with us, they had the missile force, which very much can compete. And their Navy is still primarily underground. The vast majority of it is their fast boats and their drone boats and their submarines, all of which have not been brought into effect yet, to only limited degrees in the Persian Gulf, to sink some of these boats you were talking about, to say that we're still very valid. You've killed a lot of people, but you haven't decapitated the government per se. That's what's important to understand. So far, and this idea that they can never have a nuclear bomb, okay, they still have 400 and something kilograms of reprocessed nuclear material. God only knows where that is. I would imagine it's probably been dispersed into multiple places around, so they don't have a single point of failure. You don't have that. So as if I can see these objectives he just talked about here, virtually none of them have been achieved. We're at day 20 right now. We're running low, very low on interceptor missiles. We're running low on the Tomahawk, on the standoff missiles. Apparently we have plenty of JASSMs and several others, but we're getting critically low on these things, and we're no closer to achieving our objectives than we were before, Scott. And that strait is fully in control of them. There's a reason why we're begging the navies of all these countries to come over, because ours aren't even going to attempt it. And you saw what happened when Laura tried to ask Stephen Miller, why is this not happening? At least she was asking the question. He just didn't answer it. But what does that tell you about the state of play when we're that confident in our objectives, but we're no closer to achieving them than we were on day one?
Well, listen, I think basically, there's a lot of ways to go with this, but essentially, my first thought is, like in the case of Afghanistan, where, like, I don't care if you call it a victory, just go. And unfortunately, that was a problem, because they did call it a victory, which meant we can go because everything's fine. And that was not the proper basis to plan that withdrawal, of course, right? Everything fell apart all around the withdrawal. So it's very bad. But when he says that, he left out regime change. He left out a compliant, friendly puppet government with a new ruler chosen by Donald Trump and unconditional surrender and all this stuff. So I'll take that as him climbing down 11 rungs and just say, yes, good. As he just said, we already won. So let's stop now. That's it. Figure out a way to just back out of there. And it's in Iran and everybody else's interest to reopen that strait. And the whole thing should have never been done. It would be at the very best, from the war party's point of view, the best accomplishment you could say is that they mowed the lawn a little bit. No, they did not get rid of the mullah's regime, because how could they? But they did bomb a lot of missile launchers and a lot of missiles and a lot of ships, and they can claim a lot of credit. And Secretary of War Pete can get up there and do a bunch of push-ups and stuff. And then, we did it, everyone. And then try to figure out a way, get some intermediaries in there to negotiate some kind of medium-term status quo. And I know that you and other, great experts have pointed out that it's in the Iranians' interest to keep fighting and fighting here, even if Trump wants to back out, to really drive the point home that we should not have messed with them. I would hope that cooler heads could prevail if Trump's really willing to quit. That they ought to find a way to back down too. Their point has been made. As you already said, they hit all of these bases. They're hitting all these refineries. I don't know if this is confirmed, but I think it was credibly reported before we went on here that they hit oil refinery in Haifa, Israel today. So, let's everybody just quit. Peace without victory, to paraphrase the ever lived Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, I would like to see that happen, but as you point out, there is a problem there, and that's here's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is saying we don't believe in a ceasefire. We believe in an end to the war on all fronts, but we're ready to listen as long as the proposals meet Iran's conditions. And see, from their perspective, they're like, look, this has been going on, and you can really start, and there's a lot of places you could start, but I think the best place to look at this, put it in a concise way, is Trump's assassination. Well, actually, no, back up. Our withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018, Trump's assassination of Soleimani in 2020, and then this ramp up here where Israel blew up their embassy in Syria. Then when they assassinated the leader of Hamas inside Tehran during the presidential inauguration, and then, of course, the 12-day war, and then now this one. So you take all that together, and they say there is no point in negotiating with you. You will never keep your word. We've tried to show you there's a pain present here, but now then we have been just decimated with all kinds of serious hits, but we're still viable. And the only way we can remain viable is if the pain for you goes a lot worse. And I think that they have every incentive to drag this out further, because they can suffer, and they're going to. And I think that they're willing to go even more suffering, both from bombs themselves and from the loss of revenue and the problems that could cause at home, because, and this is my perception, they calculate that Trump can't suffer like that, and that if they drug this out another 2 or 3 months, that the oil price would continue to go up into unsustainable levels, and then Trump is going to be in a world of hurt. It'll cost him at home domestically, and I think that the pain has to be a lot worse on us before they would give in to that. That's what I think.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing that, well, it's unfortunate that they started off by killing the old guy, because it only put younger, more radical people in charge. And if anyone was to caution conservatism here, it would have been him, probably.
Right.
To say, like, listen, guys, we got our licks in, could be worse, and try to call the thing off. Because the reality is that, and I'm not saying we're here yet, okay, but as the guys in the neighborhood would say, Trump is loco. You don't, if you're the leader of Iran, you don't want to make him really emotional and upset because, for example, hundreds and hundreds of sailors died when an American ship sank out there in the Indian Ocean, or whatever. When they hit our bases, as we talked about in the Gulf, they didn't wipe out the barracks. Most of them had been evacuated anyway, but they were pinpoint strikes on radar dishes and things like this. So yes, some guys died in Kuwait and all that was bad, but they weren't going for like total war against us to do everything they could to kill our servicemen, even the officers. You know what I mean? So because look, they're up against a thermonuclear superpower. So how do you fight that? Cautiously, they want to push their luck and make their point. That's fine. But, and Trump wouldn't have to use nukes at all, but those B-52s, and again, I guess they can shoot down an F-35. The Air Force is going to get cautious, but ultimately, if they're willing to commit their Air Force and are determined to get air dominance over that country and use B-52s to carpet bomb in the North Vietnamese style, Nixon over North Vietnam, and just carpet bomb Tehran, they could do that. as just ultimate, do what I say politics, Trump could be driven to that level of violence and potentially even the use of atomic bombs. Although I'm not saying that. I don't think that, but
Not yet. But
from their point of view, they know that they can only
there.
win so bad. You know what I mean?
Right. And the question is, how much pain can they inflict as a result of that? And will that bring them to, or will that wipe out our defensive? Already, we are significantly weakened as a nation because of the extraordinary amount of our PAC-3 missiles. Our interceptors have been expended here and in Ukraine and in Israel before that. The total amount, when you actually track over the number of years, how many we have funded. So we know pretty much how many total inventory that has been made from our PAC-3 missiles, the most modern air defense missiles, and now how many have been used. And it is a dwindling number, and it is not something you can replace except for in a number of years. And as longer we go on this, I mean, it's not inconceivable that we could get to virtually nothing or have to pull out the older PAC-2s and some of these other things, which are even less effective. And it can be to a real problem. So the question is, who's got the more political will? Are the Iranians willing to say, yeah, you want to send your B-52s over? Send them over. The North Vietnamese, like you mentioned, that didn't bring them to their knees. They won. The North Koreans, who were bombed just as bad. Almost every city was bombed into oblivion. Pyongyang allegedly had 2 buildings left standing at the end. They never capitulated. And so there's every reason to think that they wouldn't either. Add Gaza to the strip. Of course, there's almost, it looks like Nagasaki actually hit it, etc. So if that's what Trump is thinking, I mean, he could exhaust himself. And that's just not a good place to be. And then the question is, how long can we endure the economic pain? Iran doesn't have to do anything for that. That's stuff that's going to happen because of our actions here. And I don't know the answer to any of these. I just know that these are plays that they could make, and it's bad for all of us, whichever way it goes, unless we use your sample there or your prospect of just let's all figure this out and get it over with. Because I think that it could exist. It would be a lot harder now than it was before. And even then, I think the Iranians are going to say, well, I ain't going to do it quickly. We're not going to make it easy on you, but we'll get there, because if we don't, there's a lot more pain to go around.
Yeah. They really cast this die back in June when Trump essentially adopted Netanyahu's definition of their nuclear program being essentially equivalent to them having a nuclear weapons program, that they're making a bomb right now, that we just can't tolerate them having an enrichment program whatsoever. And once he called that bluff, yes, he did set them back by a lot, but not by so much that they can never enrich again. They've mastered the fuel cycle. They know how to do it. They can do it again more. And so then the only thing holding them at bay there is the threat that he'll just keep bombing them and bombing them and bombing them. The only way that they're going to not have a nuclear program is if we really change the regime. But if you kill the Ayatollah, they're just going to name another one. If you kill the ruling council, they're just going to name another one. What are you going to do? Drop in the 82nd Airborne and somehow shoot every last Shiite cleric who might claim authority in the government or some kind of thing? There's no way to sack the capital city, right? There's no way to finish how this plays out in a way that makes any sense. And so even though they did severely set back the program, what they really did was, like in Stand By Me, they threw their hat over the fence so that now they got to go. And now they have to keep going and going and doubling and tripling down. They don't know how to solve it. When, of course, the situation before June was that they were bluffing. Look, man, we were saying, if you make a nuke, if you start to try to make a nuke, we'll attack you before you're done. And they were saying, look, we're not making a nuke, so don't attack us. But if you do attack us, we might make a nuke. So that was the perfect standoff. Just leave it at that. That had lasted since 2006 and nothing had changed. People cry on and on all these crocodile tears about 60%. Man, they only enriched up to 60% so that they could negotiate it away.
That's
to
a fact.
try to get back into the deal. That's all it was a bargaining chip. Why didn't they keep going to 90%? Why didn't they go ahead and make a warhead? Because they weren't trying to do that. What they were trying to do was say, hey, look how far we've gotten in our enrichment. We sure could go up to weapons grade, couldn't we? You wouldn't want us to break out toward a nuke, would you? That was all that they were doing, when the whole point was to get us back to the table. Otherwise, they could have just kicked the inspectors out and said, race ya, and tried to go ahead and make a simple gun type nuke.
And look at this. This is from 2021 when they first started doing the 60%. This is really important to point out here. It says on April 13th, Iran announced its intention to enrich up to 60% U-235. This was characterized by Iran as a response to sabotage of its vast underground enrichment cascades at Natanz 2 days before. The move comes against the backdrop of sensitive negotiations happening in Vienna aimed at rescuing the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And then let's see, I think I have one of these other ones up here, which you can't see on my screen at the minute, but one by the, let's see, no, let me give that to you. Let me share that with you too, because that is equally important, because it really is relevant to what we're talking about here, about how this is even going to be resolved. And that is, this is also, I believe, from 2021, where it was talking about what the Arms Control Association said. Listen, this was all about, let's see if I have that highlighted. Foreign minister at that time said in a December 9th speech that the nuclear deal known as the JCPOA is becoming useless. The United States and Iran are not currently on a path to return to the deal, he said, but Iran would consider restoring the accord if it serves our interests. So they were signaling even back then. This was actually in February 2024. So they were trying to negotiate the thing away even as recently as that. And they said that nearly every time. So the claim that now is being said that they were racing to the bomb is incredibly reduced or ignored and rejected by the record that anyone can go and see if they want to. And they've been saying this forever. So now then we're in the pickle we are by our choice, and we have made a bad situation far worse.
Yep. And, the reality was that the IAEA had a safeguards agreement with the Iranians. They routinely verified the non-diversion of nuclear material. They had, repeatedly disavowed nuclear weapons, and we had the ability to make sure under the JCPOA, and they were willing to get back into it. It was simply a bluff. And it's also true that when Trump did bomb Natanz and Fordo and Isfahan last June, he did a lot of damage. Obliterate actually was not much of an overstatement. I mean, if there are still intact centrifuges down deep underground, they're fine, but there's no activity. They sealed up all the entrances. They know they're being watched by satellite 24 hours a day there. There's nothing that they can do really to reopen those facilities and use them. We don't know if any, people are buried alive there, or uranium, canisters of uranium, or enriched uranium hexafluoride gas or whatever are held down there or not. But they also blew up the conversion facility at Isfahan. And that's where you take the semi-refined ore, that yellow cake from the Dave Chappelle skit. That's where you take the yellow cake and you convert it to uranium hexafluoride gas, which is what you introduce into the spinning cascades of centrifuges in order to separate the 235 from the 238, get that sweet stuff, or at least a higher and higher percentage of the 235 isotope there. And then you got to convert it back to metal again to make a fuel rod out of it, or a warhead out of it, or anything else useful. And so without that conversion facility, whatever they have that's just ore, they can't transmit to gas. And whatever they have that's gas, they can't make a metal again or do much of anything with it. And I don't know for a fact the truth of it, but it seemed highly credible. And you may know more about this than me, but it seemed highly credible. The Omani negotiators claim that the Ayatollah essentially was willing to climb all the way down to the very lowest rung of the ladder, essentially, and say, look, we'll have no enrichment for between 3 and 5 years. Whatever enrichment we do have will only be to 1.5%, and we'll ship out our entire stockpile. You guys can not even ship it to Russia. We'll ship it to the United States, and you guys can turn it into fuel rods. And I think that is credible, because in fact, he didn't even just step that far down the ladder. Donald Trump pushed him that far down the ladder with his bombing run last June. It was successful as far as that goes. Yep. So this was, in other words, if the Omani negotiator is to believe there, this is as far as the Ayatollah could possibly capitulate without entirely giving up enrichment altogether, and which would have been perfectly acceptable. And I'm suspicious that that's part of the reason for the timing to start the war, was they were coming to Witkoff saying, look, we are willing to deal. And I'm sure you know as well that Witkoff cited nonsense as reasons why their offers weren't good enough. He apparently thinks that there's an enrichment facility at the Tehran research reactor, medical isotope reactor that America built for them, that is not a uranium enrichment facility at all. And this guy's totally confused about the issues he was trying to negotiate there.
Yeah, I don't think he was confused.
They were trying to get along so well anyway. They were trying to get past his ignorance and just say, look, man, we surrender almost entirely. And then they launched the war before he could, that narrative could really, take hold in the public. That, geez, it looks like
and then that's why I say Witkoff was lying, because then he's now just went out overboard every time he could get on the airwaves anyway to lie and say, oh, well, they wouldn't even, in fact, they threatened us with this 60 to whatever, 430 kilograms of nuclear, whatever, and they could make 11 bombs. And I'm like, dude, they told you that in the context of, we'll give it away. He lied about that part to make it sound like that they just didn't understand anything. And of course, he knew. He's not stupid. He's not detailed on some of these things, Scott, but he knew for sure what they were offering. I mean, anyone who speaks English would have understood that. And the Oman foreign minister made sure everybody knew before the war had been launched. And if there was any question, it was laid out right then. But that's not what anybody in America or Jerusalem wanted. And so they struck quickly so that didn't have any chance to grow any legs, as you say. I mean, it's nearly impossible for it to be any other way.
Yeah, sounds right, unfortunately.
Well, listen, we really appreciate you coming on today. We'll leave it there for the moment, and we'll keep on watching this stuff and see where it goes here. And I have hopes, and my best prayers are that your version of things works out, and that whether it's Trump and Netanyahu and whoever, Moshtaba Khomeini, if he's the one that's actually in charge, whoever, is they all say, you know what, let's all get together and we can make each other heard for a little bit longer or whatever, something, but then let's all start ramping this down. That would be good for humanity, would be good for the global freaking energy system and the agricultural system, which is also at risk here because of stuff not coming out through the Gulf. So we need to get this stuff fixed for everybody. I hope you turn out to be right.
Well, thank you very much for that. And let me just say here at the very end, if people want a deep background briefing on all this stuff, go to thefactsaboutiran.com. By all means, subscribe to my YouTube channel, but thefactsaboutiran.com. I've got a deep background briefing for everybody there about the history of America's relationship with Iran since the Carter years, at least. So thefactsaboutiran.com. And thank you, Danny.
Yeah, well, by all means, Gary, if you can, yeah, there it is right there. The Facts About Iran. Just Google that if you can't see the address right there. That'll be great. That's awesome, Scott. Thanks very much. And there I see the Scott Horton Academy. Apparently that's one of your products.
Yeah, this is I have these in-depth courses on the entire terror wars and all that, but I've taken a couple of those videos out, particularly pertaining to Iran, for everybody to get caught up on the context here.
And in fact, where can people, if they're interested in the Scott Horton Academy, where can they go to find out any more about that?
It's at scotthortonacademy.com.
That's not hard. Very good. There we go. We'll have it. scotthortonacademy.com. Thank you very much, folks. And thank you, Scott. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, we don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.